Hi, everyone, and welcome to another very special Talking Insomnia episode. We have Spyros with us. Welcome.
Hey Daniel, how are you? Good to be here.
So nice having you. And for those of you who don't know, Spyros, you were my guest, my client in
hmm
BedTyme. We worked for a while, and then just to tell everyone how this happened, a year later, I started doing this newsletter, and you sent me an email saying like, "Hey, Daniel, actually, a lot of nice things happened to me after we stopped working." So I thought it was a great opportunity to have you as a guest. So again, super nice having you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again for having me. I remember when I was like actively, let's say, going through the bout of insomnia. I remember, being like, wow, one of these days I want to be like a success story. All of these people have figured it out. I'm gonna figure it out too. And so here I am now. Part of what motivated me to come on here is because I want to, do my small part to also, help somebody else who may be suffering from a bout of insomnia like I was a year ago.
Absolutely. And there really is nothing I think that helps more than to hear stories like yours. Speaking of which,
hmm
um, tell us how it started and we'll go from
Yeah,
there.
so I was thinking about how I was gonna talk about this. I think there are like basically like four phases that I went through. There was the phase where I thought I had insomnia, but I really didn't because I didn't know what insomnia even meant. So let's talk about that for a sec. So this was in 2020 after the lockdowns. So imagine like summer of 2020, deep lockdown, COVID was still, going full on. I had just broken up with my ex who was living with me at the time. So she moved out. And then I was, by myself in a small apartment, under lockdown. And so I just focused on work and focused on health and, all of those things and, habits and productivity and all of that. I went down the rabbit hole of, let's say, biohacking and self improvement and productivity and everything. As you can imagine, one of the things that I arrived at sooner or later was like, oh, I need to optimize my sleep. I was literally using terms like optimize. And so I was, by the way, I was sleeping, I was mostly sleeping fine. Like my entire life, I had been sleeping fine. Like I used to drink a lot of coffee, so that was sometimes a bit of an issue. But I never considered myself having like any sort of sleep difficulties. But then I turned it into a problem to solve by trying to optimize. So I did, looking back at it, I did ridiculous things, like ridiculous. I would like have all of these like sleep meditations. I would have like scented candles. I would have these like essential oil things that I would like put on myself. All sorts of like concoctions with like various herbs and spices that I would make like this little like sleep shots or whatever I found online. Um, one that kind of like started pushing it over the edge was like bedtime stories. So I would not bedtime, your bedtime. One of the meditation apps I was using because I was using many of them too. That's how obsessed I was had this feature where you could have it play like a bedtime story, like you were a child, and then it was supposed to kind of like lull you into sleep or whatever. So I was like, oh, this seems like a great idea. It's gonna be like like I'm being told a bedtime story. But then what started happening with that is that like as the story was progressing, if I was still awake, I was like, oh, I'm almost at the end of the story and I'm still awake, and I would start thinking like that. Another thing that used to happen. Oh, I forgot to mention one of the big ones. I started wearing. There is a whole story about this one, but I started wearing a sleep tracker. That's when I started wearing that. And so I would obsess over the data from the sleep tracker. Like the first thing I would do in the morning, like I would look at my phone, go into the app, sync the data, and see whether how much deep sleep I got and whether I got enough REM sleep last night, as if I know how as if I knew how much was good enough. Anyway, um, now, all of that wasn't terrible because, like, here's the thing: I was getting positive reinforcement from all this. Like, the data was improving. Initially, the data was improving, so I was like, "Oh, I figured it out. This is how you optimize sleep." But then here's what started happening: because work got very stressful around that time. I was like basically stressed about work like all day, and then I would drink a lot of coffee as well. And then I would also drink a lot of alcohol, kind of as a way to kind of like relax after a stressful work day. Horribly in retrospect, but anyway. And so what started happening is that I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night for some benign reason, but then I would be thinking about work, about something stressful that happened at work. So that's when the idea was planted that, oh, I have some sort of sleep difficulty. So I started, another bad decision I made. I talked to my primary care physician about it, and he didn't take it too seriously. But he did refer me to some sort of, what did they call it? Some sort of like sleep workshop that they were offering at this healthcare provider. And I went on that, not realizing that this is like for people who have like actual problems with sleeping. And it was basically like traditional CBT-I, it was what it was. And then I was introduced to the terminology around insomnia. And I was like, oh, I must have sleep maintenance insomnia, but not sleep onset insomnia. So I started using terminology as if I was identifying as an insomniac before I even developed insomnia. And then I started applying some of the techniques they had you applying that in the traditional CBT. And then I was changing when I would take a shower to make sure that the shower is well timed with when I was going to go to bed. Like I was going down the like do ridiculous things to optimize sleep and get the ring to say that the data is good, you know. And again, up until a point, I was getting positive reinforcement from all that. But then two things happened. One is I read that book. What's it called? That terrible book, Why We Sleep.
Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep.
Mm-hmm. So I started reading that terrible book, and that one convinced me that like every night matters. Every night where I don't get the perfect sleep is like somehow taking years off of my life or my whatever, you know. But again, still going at it. And then I traveled to Hawaii. So now traveling to Hawaii from the West Coast is kind of fine because you are basically when you arrive, it's earlier where you in Hawaii than where you were, so you go to sleep easy. But then on my way back from Hawaii, now there was a 3-hour time difference. It was later in San Francisco than in Hawaii, right? So if I wanted to go to bed at a reasonable time in San Francisco, it would be too early in Hawaii time. That wasn't terrible the first couple of days, but then the third day back from the trip, I somehow wanted to go to bed like extra early or something. I thought I was past jet lag. It was also like a stressful day at work, I remember. And I remember I was lying in bed, you know, doing the bedtime story thing and the sleep meditations or whatever, and I wasn't falling asleep. And so I was like, okay, let's do something about it. Oh, I'm not falling asleep. What now? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to solve this new problem? And so I started doing this this breathing technique that I had read about, some sort of like deep breathing technique. I must have done it horribly wrong because all the breathing technique achieved is it raised my heart rate a lot. Like my heart started like pounding while I was supposedly trying to relax myself. And then I think you see where this is going. That night was like a terrible night. I barely got like 3 to 4 hours of sleep. Then the next day I was thinking about it, and I was dreading whether it was going to happen again. And then it happened the second night, the third night, and the fourth night, and the fifth night. And then as I started kind of like doubling down on trying to solve the problem, and you know, I'm a software engineer, so I was trying to debug the problem, you know, find the root cause and you know find the fix for it. It was getting worse and worse. And then I eventually got a traditional CBT-I kind of coach through my healthcare provider. Terrible experience, got even worse. At some point, I was only sleeping like 2 hours at night at best. Oh, that's when I stopped wearing the ring, by the way, because the ring had become a source of stress because I would wake up in the morning, from a terrible night, I would look at the data from the ring and it would be like flashing, you know, red and purple and saying like, you're basically dying, you know, what is going on? It would literally say, take action. And I'm like, I'm trying to take action. And so basically this is the second phase of the 4, where at this point, I'm going through a bout of insomnia, self-inflicted insomnia, but insomnia nonetheless. And yeah, I was getting super desperate. Like I remember the saddest thing about that whole experience was that like my entire day was revolving around trying to fix this. Like Like I would wake up, it would be all about, oh, maybe I need to like see morning light from when the sun is rising, or maybe I need artificial sunlight, maybe I need to time my coffee, maybe I need to take different supplements, maybe I need to go on a walk, maybe I need to go on an evening walk as well. Maybe I need to see the sunset to like fix my circadian rhythms. So my entire day would revolve around that, to the point where I would be happy to be like stressed about work, because at least being stressed about work like took my mind off of the insomnia. But then of course, it will be bedtime, and I will be back to thinking about sleep troubles. I've been ranting for a while. Did you
No,
want to ask me any questions?
I'm just hearing a story. You're telling so beautifully, so I'm just like, keep going.
Mm-hmm. All right, and so another funny one. I'm just gonna mention all the crazy stuff, just because many people listening may also have gone down these rabbit holes. At some point I was convinced that while I was in Hawaii, I got a parasite infection, and that the parasite was somehow causing the insomnia. Amazing, right? Oh, by the way, I forgot to kind of like give a timeline here. So all of like the trip to Hawaii was Thanksgiving 2020. So insomnia basically started like first week of December. At this point, yeah, and then it was the Christmas holidays, right? So I had taken some time off. The office was also closed for Christmas and New Year. So I was like, oh great, there's gonna be all this time away from work. I'm not gonna be stressed about work. This is my time to kind of like relax and get back to sleeping well. But all that did was give me more time to obsess about it. Like that's when I also started like trying to take naps in the afternoon, being like, oh, I must protect my sleep, as we say in bedtime. So I started being like, oh, maybe I need to take naps, maybe I need to stop drinking coffee, maybe I need to do this, maybe I need to do that, like all these different, like, no, I was trying to mess with all of these different tuning knobs, and it was yet like the crazy thing was, whereas before I was doing these things and I was getting positive reinforcement, things were actually getting better. Now they were getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where I was sleeping like 2 hours a night, in two horrible hours too, meaning I would go to bed, my heart would be pounding, I would eventually collapse, and then I would be jolted up, like I would be jolted, I would be awakened by my heart pounding like really, really rapidly, like to the point where I was like, oh my God, like this is going to become like an actual problem, like a problem outside of sleep at some point if this keeps going on. I was really freaking out. And then in my quest to find the solution to this, I eventually turned to, I was disappointed by like the CBT approaches, but eventually I turned to, I don't remember how, to be honest. I think I was on the App Store. I think I was on the App Store looking for what do you like in CBT? There is this concept of like how much time you should be spending in bed based on how much you're actually
sleep restriction, maybe something like that.
Yeah. See, I was looking for something related because the CBT coach that and in retrospect was terrible, had me do like aggressive sleep restriction. I was looking for a sleep restriction like calculator or app or whatever, and that's when I think BedTyme showed up on the App Store, and it seemed very appealing. Like the icon seemed appealing. It had high reviews, and then I go in and I start reading the reviews, like the user reviews, and I'm like, whoa, these people have like had at this point I've had insomnia for like a month and a week. Nothing in the grand scheme of things, right? And some of the reviews were like, I've had insomnia ever since my mom passed away like 5-10 years ago, and I'm like, what? You've been living like this for 5-10 years, like. And you were able to like get out of it. This is it. So I signed up for the. I think there was like a free trial. There's a free trial, right? Yeah, I signed up for the free trial. Immediately, I was like, wow, like this. Whoever made this like really gets this problem, because like it was nothing like CBT, like CBT-I rather. It was nothing like CBT-I. And I remember immediately the very first night after discovering BedTyme, I slept just a bit better. Just that like glimmer of hope that, oh, there seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel. I slept just a tiny bit better, or maybe more restful is the way to put it. And so this basically enters the third phase, where I was like, thanks to BedTyme, and thanks to you were my coach in, on BedTyme at the time, where I was kind of like getting better and better by the day. And then I subscribed to BedTyme. I went through a month of BedTyme and coaching with you, getting better by the day. I remember I was doing the thing. I remember one fun interaction where I think at some point BedTyme was like, oh, if you have like a rough night, give yourself a treat the next day to kind of tell your mind that it's okay. So I had gone, when I went grocery shopping, I would buy all these treats to have like as a backup for all the terrible nights I was expecting. And then at some point I'm like, Daniel, I have a problem. I have too many treats and not enough rough nights to use them for.
I remember that. That's maybe smile so much. I didn't remember that.
And so at the end of the 1 month of being a BedTyme user, I was on track to be fine. It felt like so I we talked about it. We did like the debriefing, and then I got off the app, and then off I went. Now at this point, I wouldn't say that my sleep was improving, but my sleep confidence was still like shaken. Like
actually, before we go to the fourth part here, Spyros, just tell us a little bit more, like within the app, what were the things that you learned that you felt really changed things?
Oh yeah. So the first thing that was that I really liked about the app is how it had this like almost like two phases within the app, where it's first there's like a knowledge, like where there's like an explanation of what's going on, and then there is, okay, now let's like let go of all that and move on with our lives and be happy. So first of all, the app made it like very clear that all of the stuff I was doing, all of the things I was trying to do to sleep, were actually like counteracted. That immediately like took off such a heavy burden off of me, because I stopped trying to find the next trick, the next hack, the next supplement or whatever. Like the supplements thing was getting. Oh, I forgot to mention. Once I actually developed like insomnia and got really bad, my primary care physician prescribed SSRIs. Is that what they're called?
I wouldn't be surprised it was trazodone. That's a very common
one. Yeah,
one.
trazodone. Yeah. And I remember talking to you. I'm kind of deviating here, but I want to make sure I get this out. So I went to the pharmacy. I picked them up. I think I took it for like a day or two. It kind of worked one day, kind of didn't the next day. And then I talked to you, and I was like, hey, like my PCP, prescribed this. Like, what do I do? And through talking to you through it, I was like, okay, it seems like I have two options. Either I just like, I never get on it, I never get hooked on this, or I may have to be taking it like consistently, like for years and years to come. So I decided that I don't want to rely on a substance like I had been relying on the supplements and stuff. So I emptied, where is the camera here? I emptied the box of trazodone in the trash. And then I was like, no, I'm just gonna figure this out with BedTyme and with Daniel and with like this kind of like more inner work, let's say. Anyway, so back to the app though. Another thing I really liked about the app was the pacing, because back then I was like devouring information about insomnia and about what to do about it. But the app is forcing you to go like one step at a time, right? It's like it's only giving you like one drop of content every single day and has you think about it and like kind of like really digest it. If you had given me the entire content of BedTyme, I don't even know how much it is, because I would have just like consumed it in like a weekend, trying to find that one magic pill somewhere in there that would have like fixed my problem. But the pacing was really key. And then knowing that there was like an actual human on the other side that like got it, that got the problem, and that I could like ask specific questions, that was huge. Remember at the time I also subscribed to this podcast, but on Apple Podcast, not on YouTube so much. And because one of the things I got from that one was the explanation about the hypnic jerks. Because I was like, what is this thing that's happening to me? Like, why is my body kind of like involuntarily almost like making these motions? And there was an episode about this, and there was like with an actual other client of yours, and I was like, I both got some information about it. I got a name for it. Just having a name for it, first of all, was huge. But it isn't like this crazy thing that's happening to me. Like, this is common enough to where we have a name for it. And then there were like some tips from that guest about what to do about it. Like he was almost thinking about it as a I don't remember what his tip was, but the way I interpreted it was like when it happens, think of it as like a fly or mosquito kind of like buzzing around your ear, and then it just goes away. Like it's just a small distraction. Again, like if I hear a fly buzzing by, I'm not gonna like freak out and wake up and have my heart pounding, right? Like I'm just gonna be like, oh, it's a fly. It's gonna go away on its own. So that's how I started thinking about the hypnic jerks. And lo and behold, they started getting milder and milder to the point where I almost forgot that it's a thing at some point. If anything, at some point I was like, oh, a hypnic jerk, I must be falling asleep. And then the other thing I remember in the first few kind of like days of using BedTyme, where it was explaining that how like my personality type basically kind of like made me more vulnerable to this kind of situation. That was like, oh, I can see how somebody who is like has this almost OCD kind of tendencies would be more likely to fall for the trap of trying to optimize sleep and then breaking their sleep as a result. Yeah, it was. Yeah, the information was definitely the information I remember satisfied my the rational logical part of my brain. It gave me just enough information to where I felt like I was figuring this out logically, whereas through the back door it was actually taking me further and further away from trying to solve the problem logically and more towards like letting go essentially of it. And then the second phase in BedTyme, after the knowledge part, was all about, like the way I summarize it in my head is like, life isn't about sleeping. Life is about like living life when you're awake, and sleep is just when you recharge, or one aspect of being a living being. So I started focusing a bit more on like on things that I find interesting outside of obsessing about sleep. Now, did I do this in the healthiest way possible? Not necessarily, because I was focusing on work a lot, and then I also started playing video games again. I started playing Magic the Gathering, which I hadn't played in quite a while. So I started kind of like playing Magic the Gathering. I kind of made like I made it more social by playing with coworkers and playing online with others, and kind of like watching others play on Twitch. So I kind of, back then, this was like very early on, like right at the transition, as I was kind of still using BedTyme, about to get, about to graduate from BedTyme, let's say, that I started playing video games. And it was, looking back at it, I don't regret it. It was a reasonable stepping stone, as kind of like it gave me something to be excited about and something to think about and something to do other than obsess about sleep. However, it created its own problems. Like for example, I would be on the couch over here relatively late at night watching like video game content on YouTube until I would feel like literally my eyes like closing, and I would be micro sleeping, and only then would I allow myself to go to bed, because I wanted to minimize the chances of not being able to fall asleep. So I still had that like my sleep confidence was still shaken. So it seems like I'm about to go into like this other phase. Did you want to talk about my BedTyme experience anymore?
No, I was just going to say that it gave us a very clear understanding of that process. And now, yeah, let's take us to the fourth phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is the phase where I'm like, past the like severe, let's say, insomnia, the actual insomnia, past, I've graduated from BedTyme, and I'm like slowly kind of like focusing on my life and trying to rebuild my sleep confidence. I was still using these crutches though. I was using, staying up late over here watching YouTube as like a way to really make sure I'm sleepy before I go to bed. To the point where even when I would travel, I would have my iPad and I would still watch like video game content on YouTube on the iPad, because I wanted to keep that, that connection between, I'm watching video game content and then I go to bed. Anyway, another thing I would still do is, I had given up on most of the biohacking stuff when it comes to sleep, but somehow I was convinced that I had to keep taking magnesium and L-theanine before going to bed. Like, I don't know, I think it was like some other podcast. I don't, or I thought I was like hooked on them or whatever. Like, I don't know why, but I was still thinking that the only reason I'm able to fall asleep is because I'm not the only reason, but like one of the reasons I'm able to fall asleep easily nowadays is because I'm taking, theanine and magnesium. Um, Spoiler alert, not true. I'm not taking either right now. Okay, so at this point, we're talking like February, March, May, April, May of 2021, right? So, by the way, around that time, like, just life got like really good. Otherwise, like, I got my green card at the time. I'm not, everybody can probably tell I'm not American. I'm originally from Greece. I've been living in the US for about 10 years now. I got my green card, so I'm a permanent resident. I got promoted at work that summer of 2021. I got to go home for 3 weeks and see my family. I brought my sleep anxiety with me home when I traveled, because of the massive time zone difference, and because I was eating much later. In Greece, we eat dinner at like 8, 9 p.m., and I was not used to that, so it was throwing off my sleep. Anyway, brought my iPad with me to watch my video games. Anyway, where I'm going with all of this is that, whereas I was no longer thinking of myself as having insomnia, I still had that like shaken sleep confidence, and I still had that sleep anxiety. I remember I would be in the shower at night, before bed, and I would be like, oh, what if tonight is one of those rare nights where I can't fall asleep? So I knew that it was rare now that I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. I knew it was rare. I had gotten to that point, but I was always wondering, okay, it's rare, but what if tonight is the night? Crazy how that gets you. And then a few interesting things happened. First of all, things started reopening. Like, there was like that gap in the lockdowns because we had vaccines and whatnot. So I actually started like leaving the house and socializing in person. Still playing Magic the Gathering, but at least also in person at this time. So I was meeting new people. I was going to the local game store. I was hanging out with other friends that I hadn't seen in a while. I went back home for a few weeks, as I was saying. So that alone just took my mind even more off of like sleep as like a thing I have to like constantly worry about. Like, I remember, I would start going out, socializing, going to like bars and whatnot to grab a drink with friends, and then I would come home and I would just fall asleep. I wouldn't be thinking about, oh, what if I don't fall asleep, whatever, whatever. However, now my crutch became, at this point, I kind of like toned down the video games, and I focused more on socializing. So I traded like one kind of crutch, which was the video games and YouTube, for another, which was like, oh, I'm just going to be out and socializing all the time to take my mind off of sleep anxiety. And then another thing that was happening indirectly is I would be sleeping less because I would be out late at night, like socializing. And so I would, like, of course, naturally fall asleep a bit easier because I was like constantly a bit ever so slightly underslept. And so this is kind of like, at this point, we've reached the end of phase 4. Oh, it's like a Marvel movie. Oh, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, Thanos has been defeated at it. Okay. So, but then there is another phase. There is a secret phase, which I discovered completely accidentally. So around that time, so now we are talking about almost a year since the trouble started. So we're talking about like December 2021. So yeah, actually exactly a year since the original bout of insomnia. I got, somehow, I don't remember exactly how, I got into spirituality and letting go, and the world of mindfulness and inner work and trauma healing and all of that, which I had no idea kind of like existed before. Like, I didn't know what it was. And if you had shown it to me, I would be like, what is this like spiritual mumbo jumbo woo woo stuff? Like, remember, like, I'm an engineer. I'm like super logical. I work as a software engineer. I work on robots and self-driving cars. Like, my entire day is just like very logical. And so if you had shown me this stuff before my bout of insomnia, I wouldn't get it. I wouldn't resonate at all. I wouldn't get any of it. But then once I saw it, and then having the insomnia incident in mind, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this makes, I can see how this clicks. I can see how this makes sense together. And so I started seeing what had happened to me with insomnia as basically that first night where I couldn't sleep and I started breathing heavily and like and my heart was pounding. I was like, I kind of like almost like mini traumatized myself that night. And then I was kind of like having mini PTSD every time it was time to go to bed, because it would basically remind me of that first night. And I was like, oh, okay. So at this point, I was confident enough that that I could sleep, to where I was okay with kind of like experimenting with this new kind of like way of thinking. And one of the things I did, um, clarification on that, when I was like going under like the bout of insomnia, I stopped wearing the ring, because it had become like this source of anxiety, and I had stored it in like a drawer somewhere, like out of sight, out of mind. I had associated it with insomnia. So as I started getting into like, again, spirituality and letting go and all of that, I was like, well, clearly I still have sleep anxiety. It hasn't gone away completely. There is still something from that experience that I haven't fully integrated, something I'm like still stuffing down and kind of like avoiding. One thing we were talking about over email before, as we were setting this up, was like how I was tiptoeing around my experience with insomnia. So let's touch on that a bit, because the next part is gonna make more sense. I had told a few select people about my experience with insomnia. I had told my manager at the time, because I had to kind of like give him a heads up that, hey, if you see me kind of like tired or sleepy or kind of irritable, it's because I'm going through this kind of like sleep situation. And so when he would later ask me, hey, how is your sleep? How's your health going? How's your sleep going? And I would be like, fine, but I can't talk about it. I had it in my mind that now that I had moved past like the severe part of it, I had to kind of like not think about it. I had to kind of like forget about it, or otherwise it would kind of like resurface and take over again. And so I was tiptoeing around it. And another example of this is, I told a friend of mine, as we were like having like a coffee, and she was like, "Oh, an ex coworker of mine is starting a company, like a startup in the sleep aid space. Would it be okay if I introduce you to him? Because your experience may be beneficial to like the direction of the product." And I was like, "It's kind of a sensitive topic. I don't know, as if it was like, as if I had some sort of like massive childhood trauma, abuse kind of thing." Anyway, but then I said yes to that, and that was my first glimpse. And then I talked to this guy, and I gave them my perspective and how they need to be careful about how they build the product and how they talk about it, because somebody who is like prone to sleep anxiety, it may make things worse for them than intended. Anyway, but that was my first glimpse also of using my experience as a force for good, like using it to like hopefully make my small contribution to somebody who may be going through something similar. So I was like, oh, why would I keep this like stuff down, kind of like suppressed or repressed or whatever, when I can kind of like use it as a way to like help others in some way or another, kind of like the same way we're doing right now. And okay, so now going back to the letting go stuff and to the ring, I decided, based on what I had read about letting go and whatnot, to essentially see what would happen if I were to wear the ring again. Now, was this a good idea to do this kind of like unsupervised, let's say? You could argue it was a bit of a questionable thing to do, but I felt confident enough in my ability to like handle whatever would come up that I decided to do it. I do not advise that anybody listening and has like a similar thing in mind, like, don't necessarily do this. It might have been a very bad idea in retrospect, but it worked out. So I'm going to talk about it. So what I did is I took this out of the drawer. I reinstalled the app on my phone, and then here's what happened. This was like a Sunday afternoon, I think. Afternoon meaning like it wasn't like the sun was up. Okay, so I put the ring on. Immediately, heart rate goes up. I get all tense. I had like almost like a mini panic attack. Then I was like, okay, clearly everything is fine. All I did was put a thingy on my finger. Clearly nothing is going wrong. Okay. Then I open the app, I log in, I see the visuals like that I have associated with like terrible nights of sleep. Again, the same thing, like another wave of, of kind of like stress and anxiety, and almost like something terrible is about to happen. I'm like, whoa, like there is a lot left to kind of like a lot of negative charge here left to integrate. So I was like, okay, this is having an effect. Let's kind of like stay present and work through it. And then the rest of the day goes by, and then I was gonna go to bed wearing the ring for the first time in like 10 months, 11 months, something like that. And I'll be honest, it was a terrible couple of nights. It was like like basically wearing the ring again after so long, like triggered all of those feelings and sensations from that I had associated with insomnia. But the difference is that I was able to kind of to respond to it, not react to it. Almost like that's the way I think about it. After diving into all of the like letting go stuff, it's whereas before I would be reacting as in something terrible is happening. Oh my God, my heart, my this, my that. I need to do something about it. I'm not gonna fall asleep. What's gonna happen? How long have I been awake? Instead of reacting like that, I was just in bed, relatively calm, breathing through it, noticing my heart rate, going up and down, noticing my, various parts of my body getting tense, noticing all of those like sensations that are usually kind of like in this area when you're having some sort of anxiety related, reaction. And then that first night, like most of it was me just like literally lying in bed, semi awake, just noticing all of these sensations. Clearly, I didn't get much sleep, but that was fine. I was fine with it. It was my choice to like go through this, right? So it was a bit different. Second night, more or less the same, but then almost like a miracle. I know I sound ridiculous saying that, like almost like a miracle. It's like something changed like almost overnight, and then I was like, there was never any problem to begin with. There was never a problem to begin with, and ever since I just sleep so well. I sleep really well. I sleep better than I was sleeping before 2020, before all of this. I even do things like stay up late one night, wake up later the next, like Sunday, wake up late, go to bed early, like almost like I can just it doesn't all of these things that you used to think matter a lot, like whether I woke up, late or early, whether I got sunlight or not, how many okay, coffee to some extent still, just physically plays a role. Um, but yeah, it's almost like all of these little like nuances of sleep mechanics that used to matter to me so much almost don't really matter. Like I can just like fall asleep. Now, is it completely perfect? No, and I have two examples of this that I'm still kind of like, let's say, integrating. One is that if I wake up, let's say, use the restroom around, like, let's say, like if I wake up close to my alarm clock time. So let's say my alarm clock is set to on weekdays it's set to 6:30. If I wake up at like 5:45 to use the restroom, I will struggle to fall asleep again because it's almost like so close to my alarm time that I'm kind of thinking about it too much. Um, but again, it's not something that I'm obsessing over. Sometimes I fall asleep, sometimes I don't. Either way, I'm like in my nice comfy bed, under the covers. The birds are chirping outside. That's around the time when the birds are chirping. So it feels good. And then the other one is yesterday, actually. So yesterday, two things happened. One was that I was like thinking about how I was going to be on this podcast today, and it was going to be kind of like early in the day. I had to like adjust my morning routine a bit to accommodate. I was going to be on a podcast, for the first time like that. So I had that like low key anxiety about it. And then the other thing I did is that I skimmed through the preview of your new book, like the Tales of Courage book, where it has like the success story. So I was skimming through the preview on Amazon, and I was going through the first story. What's it like,
Brian, yeah.
Brian's story, and I was like, oh yeah, I resonate. And then I get to a point in the preview where he talks about like re-triggering insomnia. Like he had insomnia, he got better, and then he was worried about like getting re-triggered. And I was like, oh, what if it gets re-triggered for me? And so as I was like skimming through the preview, I got kind of like that wave of anxiety, and I was like, oh, there is a bit more left. There is a bit more left in the tank. You know? There is just a bit more left to kind of like integrate. And so I was like, okay, you know, this is kind of like when I wore the ring. Like it triggered like this, like Brian's story triggered something. So now it's likely that I will have to like, you know, integrate that thing that just surfaced up. But again, I think I'm equipped to do so. So like last night I went to bed. Lo and behold, I wasn't falling asleep. I was very relaxed. Like interestingly enough, my heart rate was not up at all, but I was just not falling asleep. And I was like, okay, I guess this is just another opportunity to like be present and, you know, work through the sensations and see what happens. And yeah, I didn't sleep much last night, but I feel great. I feel great today, and I'm pretty sure I let go of just another bit more of that you know, of that negative charge last night. And so now I'm actually really looking forward to your book coming out on Kindle, because I want to get it on Kindle and I want to work through the success stories and see what else gets triggered as I work through them. So now that's the interesting thing. Like I've gone from thinking it's a terrible thing to then being better but tiptoeing around it to now where I'm seeking like to discover those like last bits of, you know, of that are left, so I can like let go of those as well. And I'm actively looking for ways to help others by being on this podcast, by advising that startup I was talking about, etc. So this has been quite a journey. Like I used to think that like people who talk about like finding a silver lining, that it was kind of like BS to some extent, but no, this is a big silver lining right here.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you told the story in just an amazing way, and just have a few follow-up questions, but to sort of almost kind of like just share kind of my view on what I feel and think when I hear the
Mhm.
story is basically like just saying your things in different ways, that there was this trauma, this like really scary event that happened, and you got over kind of the intense fear through the education in
Mhm.
BedTyme and our work there, but there was still some residual fear, right? And for a while you were trying to like just kind of push it down, not face the fear, and you were doing sort of okay, but
Mhm.
then when you started like what many people refer to as like exposure therapy, you sort of expose yourself to
Mm,
scared of,
yeah.
right? That's when really magic started happening. And speaking of that, and you know what you also shared in the end there, how the silver lining thing. I just want to ask, like, having gone through this journey, like, how has it changed your views, like, in other aspects of life?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a great point. Like because I realized that just as I can use this like inner work, let's say inner work techniques or concepts or mindfulness or whatever we want to call them, just like I can use those to kind of integrate the negative emotions associated with insomnia, I can do this for other parts of my life too. So like one thing that I was kind of like historically bad at was I would usually get like very irritable when something was going like wrong at work, like when a coworker messed up something, or when somebody was late, or when somebody said something incorrect, and then I had to go fix it up. I would be irritable already, and then I would kind of like have like a burst of frustration or anger. So I realized that I can apply the same concept to this, like when those sensations like rise of frustration, of anger, or I can recognize them and kind of like just be present with them and like breathe through them, as opposed to kind of like freak out about them.
Exactly.
Likewise, like with stress and anxiety, I had historically been like a kind of like, I think I got this from my mom, like very anxious, like always like scanning the future for like what could go wrong and trying to like come up with mitigation plans and plan Bs and like, you know, things to make sure everything is safe and under control. And I realized that just like just like I can't control sleep, I can't control every single aspect of my life in general. Like to some extent, I need to let go and just like go with the flow of the river, as opposed to trying to like paddle really hard to like, you know, get where make the river go where I want it to go. You know, that's an analogy from a book I read. Oh, sorry. Oh, I think there's another thing worth mentioning. Around the time, right before discovering the inner, like the spirituality stuff, there was another kind of like mini pivot point. I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Now, most people, when they hear about that book, they think about the first part of the book, which is like about his experience, in the concentration camps, etc. This is like the big impressive part of the book. But there is a second part of the book that nobody talks about. I hadn't realized it's even there until I actually read the book myself, where he talks about his approach to therapy, which is like logotherapy. And there are three concepts in that part of the book in logotherapy that were like really relevant to sleep anxiety and to insomnia. The first one is anticipatory anxiety. When you are anticipating that something might go wrong, like, what if I don't fall asleep? And by anticipating it, you are causing it to happen. Like you're kind of like, you're causing the anxiety by anticipating the bad thing happening. That was the first one. The second concept was hyperintention. When you're like really trying to make something happen or not happen, when you're like so overly intending for it, when you're craving to like fall asleep, when you're craving to not have a bad night of sleep, you're actually almost like causing that to happen, causing the opposite to happen. So the more you're trying to control, tonight's sleep and have it go well, the more likely you are to like backfire. So hyperintention was the second one. And the third one was paradoxical intention, where the way he would treat his patients to some extent is he would have them kind of like do the opposite of hyperintention, like try not to fall asleep. Try to blush. Like there's this example in the book where somebody was like blushing in public settings and he didn't know what to do about it. And in the book, like I think it was in that book, he said, try to go into a public setting and try to make yourself like blush. You can't do it. If you're trying to blush, you won't blush. So paradoxical intention is where you're like trying to do the opposite. So the way I applied this for a while, this was like for about just a few weeks before I discovered the other stuff, is I would go to bed and instead of, as I was getting ready to go to bed, instead of thinking of, what is going to happen? Will I be able to fall asleep? I would be thinking, it's bedtime, time to kind of like relax and start thinking about like exciting things and about daydreaming about tomorrow and making plans for like a trip I want to take, or like thinking about that, movie I watched the other day and how much I liked it. So it's almost like doing the opposite of what they advise you. Like I was like, normally you want to like not be thinking as you're about to fall asleep. I was like almost telling myself that this is the time to like get really excited. And next thing you know, I was asleep before I even got to have the first thought. You know what I mean? So that one was actually a good, I remember this now. This was like in September, October timeframe. So this came first. And then through that, this was like a stepping stone to the rest of the mindfulness and inner work stuff.
Oh my gosh, amazing. I think we have to start wrapping up because, if these episodes become too long, it's kind of hard to digest them. But I just want to say that it's so amazing talking to you because what I always wish for every client I have is happen to you, which is that the insomnia can become this kind of like invitation to the inner work, invitation to further like the spiritual work and like all the woo-woo stuff that actually is helpful, right? And so, just wonderful to hear it. And this last thing then, if you could say one thing to yourself when you were in the throes of it, what would you tell yourself?
I would say feel through the sensations without judging them. Because that's actually what generates all of the negativity. It's like, it's not so much the sensation itself. It's what we associate. It's the story you build around it and all of the mental concepts you build on it. Like, I'm feeling my heart rate up. That must mean I'm anxious. That means I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. If I'm not able to fall asleep, it means I'm going to like die early or whatever that book was saying. So the sensation itself is kind of neutral to some extent. Like another thing that I think this is in BedTyme too, is where it says like the sensations associated with, I think it's anxiety and excitement, they're very similar in the way they feel in the body. But depending on the mental context, we say it's a negative or a positive thing, depending on what we're thinking about it. But the sensation is very similar. It's like some sort of like adrenaline type response in both cases.
100%. It's the story that makes the difference. Exactly like you're saying. That story can change. So wonderful. It was super nice having you, Spyros. And
thanks for having me.
We'll stay in touch. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.